Hello, everybody, and welcome back to English 2367. This is Kay Swizzle checking in for week 3 of the semester. We are close to wrapping up the first half or first part of our semester together. And so definitely what you'll see discussed in this week's overview lecture will kind of run through one of your busier weeks in terms of content and will be important in giving you some ideas moving forward about some of the types of text that you can work with for your final project, and just in general, giving you some more suggestions for what you might potentially do for your highlight reel submissions that are remaining. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so like I said, this is my week 3 overview lecture. I want to direct your attention again to my office hours, which are on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 11 o'clock a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern via Zoom. I did also want to flag, which you should have gotten a Carmen message from me already about this, that unfortunately the passcode I provided at the top of the syllabus is not working. Not sure why that is, but I do have a new passcode that you can use to access my Zoom office hours, and that is available to you both in the message I sent to you in Carmen Messenger, and if you look under the course materials module on our Carmen site, you'll also see that same information represented there. So just wanted to flag that that's something that's a little different for us this go around, because there is an updated passcode for your use. So on the agenda, we've got 3 sections to cover together. We've got this week's theme, which I will talk about by way of the guiding questions to keep in mind for this week. Our weekly to-do list of tasks to complete before watching the next lecture, specifically what to read in terms of critical and creative works that you've got, and what to listen to, because this week is a little bit different than what we've done thus far. And then I'll do a very quick assignment snapshot of your 2 assignments for week 3, though you'll find that they are going to look pretty familiar because you've already done versions of these assignments prior to this point. So again, like I said, I have the office hour access information updated for you on our Carmen site and in a Carmen message that I sent to you last week during week 2. And you can find the office hour access information under the course materials module on our Carmen site at the very top. And I have included an arrow here pointing to where that is, just in case you find Carmen tricky to navigate, so that you know where that is. And then of course, other sort of long-standing information that you'll need for this class, like the syllabus, the schedule, semester survival group stuff, and whatnot, is also represented here. I also wanted to flag that if you'll notice at the bottom of the course materials module, you'll see that it says lecture notes via Google Slides. All of the lecture notes that I provide and prepare for the course of my lectures are offered in this folder or stored in this folder. You can also access them in their respective description box on the YouTube video for that lecture. But in the event that you're looking for the Google Slides in general and would like to access them or review them outside of looking at the videos for that week, I do have them included in this module as well, so that you can access them when convenient for you. All right, so again, office hour access information is now available on our Carmen site. So let's talk about this week's theme, which is slice of life storytelling on social media, personal narratives as artivism and public education. So as I said, this is going to be a bit chunkier or more robust of a week for us, in the sense that we're covering some themes and also texts that I find to be really foundational for our understandings about social mediated representation, but also that I think will be important and ideally helpful for you as you start to think about potential final project topics, given that part 2 of the semester moves very quickly into that frame of mind. So I have 4 question clusters, if you will, that really kind of round out this theme that we have for this week. So we're thinking about representing the self by way of memoir, comics, and artivism as being some of what we're kind of getting at. I also kind of use this description as sort of a secondary way of talking about this week's theme of kind of slice of life storytelling, in part because I want us to think about kind of both memoir, comics, and artivism as being really kind of different variations of how one goes about this process of representing oneself through some type of personal narrative or mediated storytelling. Now, the other reason I kind of include representing the self as like a shorthand for our slice of life storytelling theme that we have for this week, sorry for the street noise, is because when we're thinking about the topical focus of these comics, as well as the topical focus of the podcast episodes that you'll be looking at, I really want you to be paying attention to this central theme or consistent thread, if you will, of in each case, you have a creator who's representing themselves in some way that's meant to connect with their audience and create a point of entry through which the audience can feel a kind of identification with or understanding of that creator's life experience, identities, interests that they have, et cetera, based on the mediums that they're using to share those stories. So to kind of guide our point of entry into thinking about these topics, the first question cluster that I have is, how do mainstream representations of crime and incarceration on television and in film shape public attitudes on prisons and people who are presently or formerly incarcerated? So many of the texts that we'll kind of look at together for this week do focus on the prison industrial complex. This is purposeful not only because I want us to be thinking about sort of the site where creative works are being produced, but I also want us to really think about so much of the media that we consume, or what I kind of think of as prison media, is organized around kind of making the prison system visible to us in ways that kind of dramatize or make an entertainment out of it. So for example, for this week, as you're doing the reading that we'll talk about here in a moment, I want you to really be thinking about what television shows or texts through TikTok or social media in general or comics or whatever might it be, how am I potentially seeing the prison system represented quite consistently in the media that I consume? So much of the television and film texts that we kind of see in our day-to-day lives really have either kind of momentary or sustained engagements with the prison system in some capacity, whether it's a character who's sort of briefly going into prison or one who's sort of there long-term. We also see a lot of reality television texts that are very engaged with sort of representing the prison system in some way. And so I want you to really be critically thinking about, how is it that these mainstream portrayals of the prison system and of folks who are either presently or formerly incarcerated, right? How are those really informing what the public thinks prison is like and what they in turn think about people who have been inside of the prison system at one point or multiple points in their life? My secondary cluster of questions for you is, why is it important that the public reads works written by creators on the inside? And when I say on the inside, I mean people who are presently incarcerated. And we'll kind of think about this language that'll come up periodically for us of either being on the inside or in the prison system, or on the outside as being outside of the prison system. And so we want to really consider, why is it important to read works that are written by people who are on the inside, whether presently or formerly? And what is the difference between speaking on someone's behalf and elevating their voice? And I really want you to pay attention to, given that creators who are on the inside of the prison system have a different kind of access to resources and also just a different means by which they can actually distribute and tell their own stories, I want you to be really noticing and focusing on, how do creators potentially form solidarities or partnerships with other creators who are on the outside? And what does it mean to actually elevate someone's narrative as opposed to speaking on behalf of them or speaking for them? There are some really key differences there that I want us to really be noticing this week. My third question cluster for you is, how do creators utilize forms like comics, zines, and art to tell personal narratives? What kinds of visual and verbal techniques are used in comic book and graphic storytelling? This is something I'm going to talk about at length in my focus lecture, but I want us to kind of once again remember our key concept of personal narratives that kind of came to us in week 1. But I especially want us to think about, what is it about the comics and zines and even just art forms in general as mediums that are really conducive for telling and sharing personal narratives? What can be accomplished, or what are the affordances of these mediums that allow a creator to be able to convey information and tell a story in a way that's different than perhaps in a literary form, like a long form novel, or even a televisual form, like, a long or like kind of multi-episode or even single episodes arc of a narrative, right? And again, I want you to really be paying attention to, when we talk about visual and verbal techniques, I want us to consider, what are some of the tools that are kind of a creator is granted access to through using comic books or zines as a form, right, that allow them to be able to do some of this work and connect with their audience in particular ways. And finally, how does using social media to distribute comics, zines, and art potentially influence the creator's form, intended audience, and circulation? So we not only want to pay attention to social media as being the site where much of this work is being exchanged and distributed, but we also want to consider, what is it about posting this content to social media that's going to really inform how someone makes certain choices about how they're presenting this information online, right? So really paying attention to, if someone is posting a comic to Instagram versus on their website or in another location, how do some of these choices then ultimately become kind of malleable to other things like the algorithm, the user interface, and other types of details that perhaps are going to sway the creator's decision-making as to when to post, how to post, what to post, and so on. And all of this in terms of this week's theme is really building on last week's theme of algorithmic spectacle and erasure, hashtag shadow bans, and trending reactions, but in more implicit or subtle ways. So whereas last week we were really paying attention to thinking about some of the overt ways that an algorithm can perhaps constrain a creator's visibility to their audience, right? Especially for creators of color and queer creators. This week we're thinking about how do creators of color and queer creators really strategize thoughtful ways to make the algorithm work for them? And additionally, how do they use the tools made available to them by the user interface? How do they use those tools in ways that ensure that their audience is able to get some of this access that's necessary for these stories to be told and heard? All right, so I'll talk more about that in my focus lecture, but for now, let's move to this week's to-do list or tasks to complete before watching the next lecture following this overview lecture. So if you'll recall, in the schedule of assignments document, it really takes you through everything that you need to do. And of course, this is the week 3 breakdown of what you need to get done between now and the end of the week to ensure that you're kind of achieving all of the expectations that are set for you for this week. And of course, we are once again joined by Ferris. So in terms of readings, you've got 3 of them. You once again have an excerpt from So What, the Writer's Argument. This time we'll be reading pages 92 to 100 from chapter 4. For last week, we looked at the pages immediately previous to these pages in chapter 4. And I'll kind of talk more at length in the focus lecture a bit about why this is. But really what I want you to be paying attention to from these excerpts is how this book is really helping us to be attentive to the ways that an argument, at least one that is effective, is formulated for an audience, that the audience feels swayed by what is being presented in terms of the information and the argumentative claims, that they feel compelled to accept the analysis or the key takeaways that are being offered by that author or those authors. Along with the excerpt from So What, you'll be looking at Dawn K. Cecil's entry for the Oxford Encyclopedia on Prisons and Popular Culture. It is an article that you'll scroll through on their site, and I think does a pretty good job of sectioning off some of the key just takeaways and major points of focus via the kind of section headers. So I definitely want you to notice and focus on how Dawn K. Cecil carefully organizes the information into smaller sections that then make the article, I think, a little bit more readable. Though I will talk a bit about some of those key takeaways in my focus lecture, just because it's a bit lengthier. And I want to make sure that I am helping you kind of get a sense of what are some of the major points that she's covering in her article. I also want to mention that with prisons and popular culture, a lot of what Cecil is doing is taking sort of this larger topical focus of prison media and distilling it down into kind of historical and genre points of interest. And so you'll notice that she really takes a large amount of, time in terms of media history and tries to distill it into smaller sections that allow us to focus in on, key details in terms of, when does seeing the prison system represented in US media become really popular? What are some of the key patterns that we can recognize in this media, so on and so forth. And so I'll kind of talk about some of those in my focus lecture. In addition to her article, you're also going to look at Kay Sohini's article, I Draw a Graphic Dissertation, Therefore I Am, for Women Write About Comics. This is a popular press article in the sense that it's meant for an audience outside of academia, though it can also be folks within academia. I wanted us to look at this article for this week because I want you to really pay attention to how Sohini is utilizing comics as a form to convey her points about comics in terms of content. I think there's a lot of really useful takeaways in her writing as well in terms of thinking about when we're talking about academic writing, the ways that we so often assume that only written texts are going to be the most effective or efficient way to communicate an effective argument. And so I want you to really notice how Sohini is putting forth an argument about the affordances of using comics when talking about comics as a way to really kind of, in some respects, practice what one preaches, or to actually put into practice some of the arguments that an author is mobilizing about the genre and about the medium. And we'll expand on that more in the focus lecture. Now, this is where our kind of schedule for this week is a little bit different. So I've included an important note here that week 3's assigned materials are a bit different from weeks 1 and 2. Instead of having readings paired with viewings, you'll be engaging with 3 types of assigned texts. So you've got scholarly works to read as secondary sources, which are those 3 that I just talked about from So What, Don K. Cecil, and Kay Sohini. You have creative works to read as primary sources, and then you have podcast episodes to listen to as primary sources. So whereas normally in weeks 1 and 2, I had a set amount of readings for you to pair with a set amount of viewings, this week we're changing it a little bit, that you're going to be reading a few different things and listening to a few different things, as opposed to watching something paired with reading. Here's what I mean by that. So you've got a few different creative works to look at for this week. You have 1 comic by Lawrence Lindell, 1 comic by Brina Nunez, and 2 Instagram comics by Nes Garza that are represented here. And with the comics that we're looking at for this week, I want you to be paying attention to or noticing when you look at them via the Carmen site, whether they're posted to the creator's personal website or whether they're posted to Instagram, and to notice some of the kind of ways that these, how do I want to put this? Like where these texts are housed inform perhaps kind of the readability of them, right? So how is it set up for the audience to engage with? But I also want you to notice things like, how big is the comic? How intricate is the artwork? Is there text on the artwork, right? And I'll talk more in my focus lecture about some key concepts that will be helpful to consult when thinking about what is the process of reading comics really consisting of. But mostly for our purposes with these creative works, I want us to be thinking about how does posting one's art or one's comics to social media create an opportunity for a wider audience who can really engage with the personal narratives that are being shared in these forms. And so you'll notice that there will be some themes for this week related to Black mental health, related to mixed race identity, related to kind of generational like experiences within institutions, as well as thinking about what it means to labor for a corporation like Amazon. Also, we have these works. We have another Instagram comic by Nes Garza that's represented on the right side of the screen. You also have 2 carousel posts by Tana Tucker, and carousel posts are the ones on Instagram that you can kind of swipe through and there's multiple images in the post. Those are represented in the middle of the screen. And then on the left side of the screen, you'll see 1 poster that represents the posters by Trinidad Escobar that we will be looking at for this week as well. Now, I want to note that the posters by Trinidad Escobar, there are 8 of them total, and you'll access those by her website, which I have posted to our Carmen site. But again, I want you to really be paying attention to, given that we'll be looking at creative works that vary in terms of being housed on Instagram or on the creator's personal website, I want you to notice how your process of reading takes place differently based on where the text is located. I also want you to really pay attention to the relationship between word and image in the case of each of these. And as I'll kind of expand on in my focus lecture more, I also want you to notice, for example, with the Instagram posts, how is the caption also contributing to the meaning making of the image that you're reading? Whereas on the personal websites for creators, you don't have a caption that's supplementing what you're reading within the poster or within the panel. All right, in addition to those creative works that you are reading, I also have 2 episodes of a podcast for you to listen to. And they're both from the podcast Ear Hustle. You'll be listening to the episode titled Meet Ear Hustle, which is about 5 minutes, and then Sellies, which is in kind of the 20-minute range. In total, it'll be 30 minutes of listening, which might feel really long, but you could always listen to these when you're walking or doing another activity. But what I want you to really pay attention to is that the Meet Ear Hustle episode that I'm assigning for this week is going to kind of give you a basis for understanding what this podcast is, what are some of the goals or sort of the purposes behind the podcast as a whole. And then with Sellies, we're going to be looking at a specific episode that's really engaging with different types of personal narratives that are being exchanged by way of the hosts of the show, as well as some of the folks that they interview. And I want you to really pay attention to the fact that whereas with up until now, we've been paying attention to, text that we're watching, and video has been our primary mode in terms of medium. With this week, we're also working with static images, meaning that images that are not moving, right? which means that the creator has to really think about different types of affordances that are allowed through the text when you don't have a moving image that can communicate certain things. And with podcast episodes, I want you to be really noticing and paying attention to how is sound working in both of these episodes in ways that are similar in terms of it being the same podcast, but also different in terms of the purpose of each of these episodes, right? So what types of sounds or what types of transitions are built into an introductory episode for a podcast, as opposed to an episode that comes later on in the podcast, right? And so as you're listening, I want you to pay attention to, are we getting background noise? Are we getting music? How many voices are you hearing? How is the mic literally or figuratively being passed around in these conversations, right? And so in pairing these podcast episodes with the Instagram and webcomics that you're looking at for this week, part of my purpose here is to really think about how can we notice the ways in which sonically and visually, right, beyond video, that a creator is representing the self in such a way that really allows for us as the audience to access a kind of slice of life or get a sense of a little bit of what their life is like by engaging with them through the points of entry they're creating in their respective works. So with that being said, let's talk briefly about the assignment snapshots for this week, or an overview of what work that you need to get done for week 3. So once again, you've got a highlight reel due. This is your 3rd highlight reel out of 4. So next week will be the last one that you need to complete. But highlight reel number 3 is due on Wednesday, May 25th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, your favorite submission time. But as a reminder from the syllabus, you have Wednesday assignments that, of course, ideally are turned in by Wednesday at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. However, there are extended deadlines baked into the submission schedule. So if for whatever reason you can't get highlight reel number 3 done by Wednesday, you do have until Friday at 3:00 p.m. Eastern to submit your highlight reel to your group shared Google folder without you losing points or it being marked as a 0. If for whatever reason you need more time than this to turn in your assignment, please reach out to me via email or talk with me via office hours, and we can figure out an alternative submission timeline for you that's conducive to protecting your wellness and also acknowledging your capacity. But again, ideally, you'll turn in highlight reel number 3 by Wednesday, May 25th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern, but you do have ultimately until Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern if you need a little bit more time to get this assignment turned in. And then I've included for you again, in case it's useful, depending on how you work with the materials posted to our site, once again, the prompt and just kind of relevant information that can be helpful to navigate and utilize when completing this assignment. I also want to remind you once again that when you're completing your assignment, it's helpful to follow the writing steps, which are watch and read, reflect on material, identify elements, take time to outline, incorporate tools, no assumptions made, and get creative. And following those writing steps can be really beneficial to ensure that you're in the best possible position to create a highlight reel that reflects your own comprehension of the material, but especially demonstrates how you're putting a secondary source in conversation with a primary source, whether one or multiple. Now for this week, you might be thinking, well, we don't have videos this go around, so how do I possibly show that interplay between primary and secondary sources? And if you'll recall on an earlier slide, I indicate which texts act as our secondary sources for this week and which texts act as our primary sources, primary, secondary. I think I got those right. I will talk more about the differences between those terms in my focus lecture. But for now, just know that you'll either need to take the John K. Cecil or the Kay Sohini article and use one of those readings and pair that with one or multiple of the primary sources for this week to talk about how that secondary source really illuminated something for you or helped you notice something in particular about the primary source or sources that you choose to highlight for your highlight reel. And again, if you've not had a chance to look, I do have some sample highlight reels available in the highlight reel prompt. There is a hyperlink that will redirect you to look at these projects if you find that it's tricky to come up with some other ideas. But once again, these are examples of highlight reels that were created for an in-person version of the class. So the configuration of what content they cover is a little bit different. And once again, you really want to make explicitly clear in your highlight reel how one of the secondary sources helped you to understand something in particular about one or more of those primary sources, okay? And then finally, you also have a reel reaction due this week, and this is your second of 2 reel reactions. So after this, you will not have to do another one of these. But once again, a real reaction is going to be the discussion board post that you put together after reviewing your peers' highlight reels. And the point here is that you're really taking an opportunity to look through what your peers have created and just kind of think about how the way that they've selected a medium or an approach for conveying their own reflection about, how one of the secondary sources helped them think about or understand something in particular about one or more of those primary sources. You're looking at these other projects to help you also consider what are some of the similarities between how you created your highlight reel and how the other members of your group created their highlight reels. You can also notice some differences between them, and it can also be helpful to discuss perhaps, did they focus on a concept or on a detail that you didn't cover in your own highlight reel, that upon seeing how they've kind of highlighted that in some capacity in their own project, you now are really realizing how this is something that's important to pay attention to, or perhaps you understand something different about it. Okay, so you really want to be thinking about this real reaction as a comprehensive response, meaning that you should be looking at your group members' creations as a whole and basing your response off of those projects as a whole. Okay, and then once again, so real reactions number 2 is due on Saturday, May 28th, but because it's a Saturday assignment, you do have an extended deadline of Monday at 8:00 a.m. Eastern. So if for whatever reason you cannot meet that Saturday, May 28th deadline of 11:59 p.m. Eastern, you do have additional time built in that you can turn it in up until Monday at 8:00 a.m. Eastern, and it will not be considered late and you will not receive a 0 for the assignment, okay? If for whatever reason getting your real reactions done is also posing an issue with your capacity or your schedule, please reach out to me sooner rather than later, and we can strategize ways to ensure that we are protecting your wellness and also creating a schedule that's conducive to you succeeding in the class. But reaching out to me sooner rather than later is going to be the best approach to accomplish this. And also reaching out before the day that the assignment is due is going to make sure that there's ample time to actually discuss an alternative submission schedule if you need one. Okay, so I've also posted the prompt here if you need some reminders, once again, of what you need to accomplish for the real reactions. But if you'll recall, there are some guiding questions offered in the how to complete this assignment section of the prompt. I also just want to remind you, if it's helpful at any point for us to talk via office hours or email about what in particular maybe you're struggling with or you have questions about with this or any of the other assignments, please do not hesitate to let me know, because I am more than happy to talk about those with you to make sure that you feel most comfortable and confident to succeed in the class. So that is everything that I have for you for this overview lecture. Again, if you have any questions, you're worried about anything, or even if it's as simple as you have a question about something that's covered in the reading and you would like to work through it together, I am more than happy to do so. However, I can make sure that your experience in this class is a comfy and cozy one. I am happy to work with you on. My goal, especially since it is an asynchronous and online class, is to be available to you to the best of my ability. And so please know that there are no dumb questions. If you're nervous about something, unsure of something, I'm happy to look at assignment drafts before you turn them in. I'm happy to talk about assignment prompts. I'm happy to talk through readings or viewings or anything that you have questions about that you're maybe struggling with, or just simply want to talk to someone about. However, I can be a support system as you navigate the course, I am willing and happy to do, right? So this is me, Kay Swizzle, signing off from my overview lecture, wishing you the best of luck for this week, and I will talk with you again in my focused lecture. I will talk with you soon. Bye.